It's time to spotlight Nvidia, the company down 16% from its high 2 months ago. Despite the strong earnings that we saw last week, shares continue to trade lower. Joining us now, Samuel Kerr, the global head of equity capital markets at Merger Market. Samuel, thank you for taking the time to be with us. My last guest, Don Kaufman, was talking about, reignited concerns over an AI bubble. He thinks they're overblown. I'd love to start with your thoughts on are we in an AI bubble?
I think it's definitely something that more investors are concerned about with an AI bubble. I think not only are valuations very high in AI stocks, the amount of capex and the amount of spending that's going to have to take place to sustain those valuations are looking increasingly challenging. And I think with bubbles, right, they can often be self-fulfilling. And the amount of talk that we've had over an AI bubble is certainly prompting concerns among investors that we're certainly looking like we're in one. I think the reaction to Nvidia's results last week, which were pretty strong, really, if you think about it, big earnings beats and such on all their numbers. The short-lived rally that happened afterwards, then followed by a very big fall, intraday, I think shows you certainly that investors are now very concerned that that's the state of play, and that's where we are.
And we've certainly seen this shift. It's almost felt like a shift in the last couple of weeks. What do you think shifted sentiment that made it so those fears could no longer be overlooked?
I think whenever we get naturally to this time of year, you start to get a bit of profit taking. Thanksgiving this week over in the US, that's going to certainly maybe focus investor mind a little bit more on protecting those end of year returns. There has been a very big, riding of this sort of wave up to the top of the market, and most investors have been very invested in the market, particularly in AI stocks. So I think that was first thing is it seemed to be the right time to start taking money off the table and to profit take. I think also that there are growing concerns out there about the sustainability of Nvidia's earnings going ahead. The financing relationship it has with its hyperscaler clients has been a big concern and has been pointed out in quite a few pieces now, and it has been a point of public commentary. And I think also there does seem to be now a shift in the narrative around AI to rather being sort of AI being a trend that lifts all boats to one of there being specific winners and losers. And it feels a little bit now in the last few days we're getting into the case of Nvidia versus Google being the narrative that's going to perhaps dominate the next few months or years of AI.
And what do you think? So you bring up the battle lines conversation. Yesterday, we spent a lot of time talking about Google potentially emerging as a competitor to erode some of that market share for Nvidia. What does that mean for investors, this sort of battle lines that we're starting to draw now around this AI race when it seemed to be, sort of a one-horse race for a long time?
I think what investors are thinking about when it comes to this is the pure computational power that Google's got. It has a data center advantage over all of effectively Nvidia's clients when it comes to what it can do with AI and its computing power that it's got, mainly just built in through the years of dominance it had in search and in data processing. So I think that gives Google a real big head start. And if you look at, say, Buffett taking this massive stake in Google that he took recently, that certainly seems to shift investor minds that actually if Google can move away from Nvidia chips, which obviously was some of the news the other day that Gemini chips are now, not using the Gemini is using Google chips rather than Nvidia ones, and Meta itself moving to Google chips as well. That does potentially lead to a big crisis for Nvidia, because obviously if you have Google as the clear winner of AI and producing through Gemini potentially an LLM that does win that battle, when you think about sort of ChatGPT versus other sort of LLM models, that would be a real existential crisis potentially for Nvidia as far as investors are concerned. Now it may not be, but it certainly would lead to a little bit of a revaluation when it comes to their value.
And how influential do you think the flip side of that is? You mentioned Berkshire taking their stake and some of these positive headlines. On the flip, we've got Peter Thiel pulling out his stake in Nvidia. We've got Michael Burry shorting Nvidia. We've got SoftBank exiting their position. How influential was that to the narrative as well?
I think the biggest one was Thiel, right? Very few people are as pure play and AI involved as Peter Thiel. And I think if you get to a stage where someone like that is taking their money out of Nvidia, that's going to make a lot of people ask questions. And I think that probably was a little bit of a prompt. Some of the selling that we saw was for someone who owns Palantir, which is one of obviously the biggest players in the space, to take their money out of Nvidia. I mean, that's certainly maybe more than Michael Burry or SoftBank, right? That's certainly that's a big sell indicator for lots of people, I would think.
And Samuel, the last time we talked, we pretty much focused on IPOs and this IPO boom that we've been seeing. But with this AI sentiment shift, I'd love to get your thought on how that's affecting some of these AI IPOs that we've seen, and also any that were coming, particularly with the downturn we've seen in the crypto markets.
Yeah, I mean, because those were the two big themes driving the US IPO market this year were AI and cryptocurrency. And we started to see a bit of a pullback in both at the same time, which is almost like sort of the worst case scenario, I think, for the sort of general IPO sentiment. Obviously, we've got a few crypto filings for cryptocurrencies sort of aligned companies to do IPOs in the States, most notably Grayscale and Kraken have both filed for IPOs. But with Bitcoin cratering in the way it has recently, it would be a very difficult time, I think, to bring those to market. And if you look at the sort of successful crypto IPOs of this year, Circle and Bullish, they've lost a lot of their post-IPO gains. And then you have others like Gemini, which are well underwater from their IPO price. So I think that's certainly something that's going to be in investors' minds when they're looking at cryptocurrency IPOs and whether they think this market run has a much more sustainability. I think in general, if we do see a pullback from AI and cryptocurrency, you might start to see a shift in the IPO investor mindset back to perhaps more sort of traditional industries which have strong revenue growth, strong top line margins. Something like Medline, which has been in the market for a long time. That's a sort of high quality defensive investment that perhaps would gain a lot more traction in a market where there is less appetite for sort of the growth provided by AI and cryptocurrency.
Well, Samuel, we appreciate you taking the time. I think it's the end of the day there for you in the UK, so I hope you have a great rest of your day and a wonderful holiday. Samuel Kerr, the Global Head of Equity Capital Markets at Merger Market.